Avia.pro journalists received video footage of the first alleged use of US JDAMR bombs in Ukraine. The aerial bomb appears to have been dropped from an aircraft. However, a group of Ukrainian military officers filming the situation may be observers. In the video footage you can see the moment of the strike with the JDAMR aerial bomb. As a result of the impact of the latter on the target, it can be seen that the force of the explosion turned out to be very large, while a huge diameter of about half a kilometer. Shock wave is formed with an estimated diameter of about half a kilometer. There are no details about the use of such weapons. However, the area in the video is very similar to the area of the Kremenets-Svitovo line, where, by the way, the Ukrainian Air Force was previously quite active. The Ukrainian Air Force has received Joint Direct Attack Munition Extended Range, JDAMR, precision-guided bombs from the US, enabling them to hit large-sized Russian targets, such as bridges and hardened fortifications, from long distances. The head of US Air Forces in Europe, USAF, General James Hecker, revealed details about Ukraine's use of the JDAMR at a media roundtable held on the sidelines of the 2023 Air and Space Forces Association's Warfare Symposium in Aurora, Colorado. A serious danger is that JDAMR bombs can hover for a distance of up to 72 kilometers, and the mass of the largest of them is more than 900 kilograms, which causes huge destruction during the impact. Russia's defense minister has faced criticism for being out of touch with the realities of the fighting in Ukraine. Sergei Shoigu has been faulted for his lack of military experience. But now, he has paid a visit to the front lines and has returned home armed with a plan. Shoigu told officers in Moscow on Tuesday that Western efforts to fuel the Ukrainian war machine have failed. And he explained why commanders have devoted so many resources to capturing the eastern city of Bakhmut. Shoigu said, "This city is an important hub for Ukrainian troops in the Donbass. Taking control of it will allow us to conduct further offensive actions deep into their defensive lines." However, the Ukrainians serving on those lines say the Russians are poor soldiers. And they say they will not leave. One Ukrainian soldier who joined the front line for about a week in January talked to NHK. Dmytro Shatrovsky said, "As long as the Russians are creating pressure, it can be channeled and diverted in a certain direction." More than 70,000 people lived in Bakhmut before the war. Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister Irina Vereshchuk said on Tuesday that fewer than 4,000 remain. She said many are hiding out in basements, which may make it difficult to evacuate anyone who might want to leave. As for the war in Ukraine, the armies of Moscow and Kiev both have strengths and weaknesses. According to Newsweek magazine on March 7, citing experts, Russian President Vladimir Putin has strategically used winter as a tool in the conflict in Ukraine. However, that plan not only failed, but now Moscow's forces may be at a disadvantage due to warmer weather in the neighboring country. However, according to experts, Kiev should not be caught off guard because of the advantage. Mud is an important factor, especially in the context of someone stuck in the mud or having to navigate the vehicles, William Reno, political science professor at Northwestern University, told Newsweek, convenient on the mud. According to military analysts, the mud in Ukraine will be an aspect of nature against the Russian military. John Spencer, a retired U.S. officer, told U.S. Magazine that the importance of this factor in the war cannot be denied. It has a direct impact on the mobility of combat vehicles, on formation strategy, as well as on vehicle maintenance. We know that Russia really has a hard time with this. Imagine a car in the mud, broken down and stuck, the officer said. According to him, the Russian military will be forced to use roads to avoid muddy fields, which makes them more vulnerable to attack. As the mud grows, the routes through which the Russian military can move become more limited. Because of that limitation, they will be more vulnerable to attack, the expert said. Notably, the officer who visited Ukraine in 2022 said that Putin's army does not seem to be as well equipped to deal with the weather as Ukraine's forces. Super cold weather is not as dangerous as cold and wet weather, he said. Mud increases moisture in the feet inside the boots, and that causes injuries to soldiers. Russia may have a lot of soldiers, but it doesn't have a lot of high-quality military equipment. The officer added that the West is providing such equipment to Ukraine. However, political science professor William Reno warned about Ukraine being subjective to weather advantages. According to him, Russia still possesses long-range artillery, which can hit Ukrainian targets from a position that Kiev's forces cannot reach to destroy. Currently, the Russian side has not commented on the above comments of experts. According to military researchers, China is studying the military situation in Ukraine to plan its response to the US in the event of a conflict. A recent review by Reuters corroborates this statement. Reuters reported on March 8 that 100 articles in 20 Chinese defense journals showed that Beijing was scrutinizing what weapons and technology the United States could deploy if there was a conflict in the Strait Taiwan. According to Reuters, hundreds of researchers from universities in China are affiliated with the military, weapons manufacturers and intelligence experts to examine the offensive activities of the Ukrainian military. As Chinese officials call for peace and avoid commenting on Moscow's military activities, Chinese articles have more openly commented on Russian military activities. At this time, the Chinese Ministry of Defense has not responded to a request for comment from the researchers, so Reuters cannot conclude on Beijing's intentions. However, Reuters sources said that the Central Military Commission of the Communist Party of China, headed by President Xi Jinping, wanted to capture the above information. According to Reuters, about 5 articles by Chinese military researchers highlight concerns about the role of Starlink, the satellite network developed by billionaire Elon Musk's company. An article in September last year by researchers from China Military Technical University said that when Starlink has good performance, helping to ensure communication for Ukraine, the US and Western countries will definitely continue to use this system in the future. This is a pressing issue for China. Beijing must find a way to develop a similar satellite network or find a way to disable Starlink. Besides, driverless vehicles also need more investment. The article in Tank Warfare magazine suggests that unmanned aerial vehicles will play a pioneer role in future wars, with the same ability as drones to neutralize enemy defenses direction. As for the ground forces, experts note that China should improve its ability to protect military equipment because Stinger and Javelin missiles have caused serious damage to Russian armored vehicles and warships. In addition, Colin Koh, a fellow at the Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Singapore, said that the activities of Ukrainian guerrilla forces are also worth considering because, like Russia, China has a transportation system by road iron, an element that makes logistics very vulnerable to sabotage. Notably, an article published in October 2022 by the National Defense University suggested that China should pay attention to the role of the HIMARS artillery missile system in the Ukraine war. The analysis suggests that if the HIMARS intervene in the conflict in the Taiwan Strait, China's advanced missile systems, though aided by drones, will face a very different adversary. In the past, Chinese military analysts have worried about the superior military might of the United States. The conflict in Eastern Europe further clarifies the problem when Russia has not been able to overwhelm Ukraine when the Kiev government has the support of the United States. However, if comparing Ukraine and Taiwan, the scenario is somewhat different in terms of geographical location. If China blocks Taiwan, the island will be isolated. Therefore, any military force that wants to support Taiwan must confront China directly. Meanwhile, for Ukraine, Western countries can still help through their European neighbors. In addition to developments on the battlefield, the articles also commented on the role of the media front, an element in which Ukraine and its allies are said to be gaining advantage. An article by the Information Engineering University of China in February suggested that Beijing should prepare for a global backlash, similar to what Russia has encountered. China should promote the construction of cognitive confrontation platforms and tighten control of social media to prevent Western information campaigns from influencing its people during a conflict, he said. South Korea's government approved export licenses for Poland last year to provide Ukraine with Crab howitzers, which are built with South Korean components, a defense acquisition official in Seoul told Reuters on Wednesday. The comments are the first confirmation that South Korea officially acquiesced to at least indirectly providing weapons components to Ukraine for its war against Russia. Seoul officials have previously declined to comment on the crabs, fueling speculation over whether South Korea had formally agreed or was simply looking the other way. The Defense Acquisition Program Administration's DAPA Technology Control Bureau reviewed and approved the transfer of the howitzer's South Korean-made chassis, said Kim Hyung-cheol, director of the Europe-Asia division of the International Cooperation Bureau. We reviewed all the documentation and possible issues inside DAPA, then we made decision to give out export license to Poland, he told Reuters in an interview at DAPA headquarters on the outskirts of Seoul. He later stressed that the government's stance is to not transfer weapons systems to Ukraine. South Korea's defense ministry noted that the crab is made up of components from several countries, and that the transfer did not involve a complete South Korean weapons system. Produced by Poland's Huta Stalowa, the crab is a self-propelled howitzer made by combining a South Korean K9 Thunder chassis, British BAE Systems turret, French Nexter Systems 155mm gun, and a Polish fire control system. Following Russia's invasion in February last year, Poland sent 18 crabs to Ukraine in May, and the two countries have signed orders for dozens more. Russia calls the war a special military operation, and President Vladimir Putin last year accused Seoul of providing Ukraine with weapons, saying such a decision would destroy their bilateral relations. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol said at the time that South Korea, a U.S. ally, had not provided any weapons. His administration says it has no plans to change that policy. The head of DAPA has the right to decide what to export, but in practice it's up to the president's will as well, said Yang UK, research fellow and defense expert at Seoul's ASEAN Institute for Policy Studies. A government has to consider all positions including the foreign ministry's position, diplomacy, as well as economic considerations, he said. If Korea supports Ukraine, Russia may retaliate by selling up-to-date aircraft to North Korea or transfer technology that North Korea really needs. South Korea has benefited from Europe's rush to rearm, signing a massive $5.8 billion arms deal with Poland last year for hundreds of Chunmoo rocket launchers, K-2 tanks, K-9 self-propelled howitzers, and Fa-50 fighter aircraft. Kim said Poland would need further South Korean permission to provide any of those new weapons to Ukraine. DAPA officials previously stressed that those sales are for boosting Poland's defenses, rather than helping Ukraine. Seoul had no plans to obtain nuclear weapons and would rely on an extended deterrence of North Korea in an alliance with the United States, South Korean Prime Minister Han Duck-soo said on Tuesday. From the point of view of deterring senseless provocations on the part of North Korea, we need to work more closely with the U.S. in terms of joint planning or some kind of joint operations and implementation, the minister told a meeting with foreign journalists in the city of Busan, as relayed by a Sputnik correspondent who attended the meeting. We need a stronger extended deterrence, including with nuclear weapons. Therefore, we do not have any solid plans to obtain nuclear weapons in any time frame. The Prime Minister added that South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol was not speaking about South Korea obtaining nuclear arms when he had spoken of the need for closer cooperation between Seoul and Washington regarding the plans to use U.S. nuclear forces. Seoul will continue holding joint military drills with Washington despite Pyongyang's reaction, the minister said. He acknowledged that joint drills would certainly make Pyongyang nervous, adding, however, that this could not be a reason for preventing Seoul from strengthening its alliance with Washington, aimed at deterring North Korea's provocations. The minister also said that Seoul was not considering the supply of lethal arms to Ukraine. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, making an unannounced trip to Iraq on Tuesday, March 7, nearly 20 years after the U.S.-led invasion that toppled Saddam Hussein, said Washington was committed to keeping its military presence in the country. Austin, the most senior official in President Joe Biden's administration to visit Iraq, was the last commanding general of U.S. forces there after the invasion. Austin told reporters that U.S. forces are ready to remain in Iraq at the invitation of the government of Iraq. The United States currently has 2,500 troops in Iraq, and an additional 900 in Syria, to help advise and assist local troops in combating Islamic State, who in 2014 seized swathes of territory in both countries. The 2003 invasion led to the deaths of tens of thousands of Iraq civilians and created instability that eventually paved the way for the rise of Islamic State militants after the U.S. withdrew its forces in 2011. On his trip to Baghdad, Austin met Iraq Prime Minister Mohammed al-Sudani and later in Erbil met with the president of the Iraqi Kurdistan region, Nachirvan Barzani, where he condemned Iran's repeated cross-border attacks on Iraq. Last year, Tehran fired missiles at bases of Kurdish groups in northern Iraq it accuses of involvement in protests against its restrictions on women, displacing hundreds of Iranian Kurds and killing some. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador rejected on Tuesday any attempt at foreign intervention in Mexico after confirming the murder of two U.S. citizens kidnapped last week in Matamoros. President Biden has also offered me that they will respect our sovereignty, and we are grateful for that because we will not allow intervention by any foreign country. Mexico is not a colony, López Obrador said at his morning news conference. 2 of 4 Americans kidnapped by gunmen on Friday after they drove into northeast Mexico have been found dead, and the 2 survivors have returned to the United States, the local government said on Tuesday. The 4 were in a white minivan when they entered Matamoros on Friday. Gunmen fired on them shortly after they crossed into Mexico and then herded them into another vehicle before fleeing the scene, the U.S. Embassy in Mexico said. López Obrador expressed his sincere condolences and said one person was in custody over the kidnapping in Tamaulipas, which has long been one of the most violent, gang-ridden states in Mexico. He pledged to bring the perpetrators to justice. The kidnappings have put a harsh spotlight on U.S. concerns over widespread gang violence in Mexico. Republicans, in particular, have been pushing for the U.S. government to take a tougher line on organized crime south of the border amid rising overdose deaths caused by fentanyl, a synthetic opioid trafficked by Mexican cartels. One of Australia's top government bureaucrats on Wednesday demanded Russia crack down on the large number of cyber criminals operating in the country, saying their actions posed a threat to national security. The greatest density of cyber criminals, particularly those with ransomware, are in Russia, Michael Petsullo, Secretary of the Department of Home Affairs, told the AFR Business Summit in Sydney. They are not a rule of law country, and the thought that you can apply conventional law enforcement disciplines is completely naive. We call on the Russian government to bring those hackers to heel. A cyber attack could actually come unattributed, it could be a criminal act, or it could be a proxy actor working with or on behalf of a state, or it could be a state, he said. The blurring and the ambiguity that it generates is a challenge just for policy, let alone regulation. The Australian government last month said it planned to overhaul its cybersecurity rules as well as set up an agency in Petsullo's department to coordinate government investment in the field and help coordinate responses to hacker attacks. The move follows a rise in cyber attacks since late last year, with breaches reported by at least 8 companies, including health insurer Medibank Private Ltd and Telco Optus, owned by Singapore Telecommunications Limited. The United States and Britain sanctioned several Russians accused of cyber attacks last month, saying ransomware attacks have paralyzed businesses, schools, and hospitals. A spokesperson for the Russian embassy did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Argentine President Alberto Fernández announced on Tuesday he will deploy 1,400 federal agents and part of the Argentine army to strengthen security efforts in the city of Rosario, days after the family of the soccer star Lionel Messi was attacked. We are going to put an end to the criminal violence of delinquents and merchants of death, said Fernández in a TV message addressed to the nation. In addition to these measures, 600 surveillance cameras with facial recognition will be set up in the city, prison control will be stepped up, and a delegation of the Financial Information Unit, a body created to prevent money laundering, will be installed in Rosario. The city has one of the highest murder rates in Argentina as gangs linked to drug trafficking coexist, according to judicial reports, and confrontations with injuries and deaths are frequently reported. A threatening handwritten message to the Paris Saint-Germain forward was left on a supermarket belonging to his wife's family early on Thursday, March 2, morning, after 2 people on motorcycles shot the business. The UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk on Tuesday criticized governments for restrictions on civil society in a speech that also took some Western states to task for their records on poverty and police violence. The highly anticipated speech was Turk's most comprehensive address to the Geneva-based UN Human Rights Council since he took office in October, and was being closely watched by diplomats and rights groups to see what he would prioritize. Turk, who is Austrian, said his main message to governments was to listen to people, victims, and human rights defenders. Turk opened the speech by referring to the shocking magnitude on the impact of the war in Ukraine, which would harm the rights of Ukrainians for generations to come. In a rare criticism of Western democracies, Turk raised U.S. police violence against blacks and a possible record drop in living standards in Britain, urging London to talk with striking workers. He raised China's alleged rights violations, including the large-scale detention of minority Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Turk said his office had opened up channels of communication to follow up on rights issues in China. Beijing vigorously denies all abuses. MC, Afghanistan has the highest maternal mortality rate in Asia. Faced with the situation that mothers in disadvantaged areas face difficulties in maternity care and childbirth, many young women in this country have rushed to act. These young Afghan women are undergoing training to save lives of mothers and babies in remote parts of the country where medical help is scarce. They are participants of a trainee midwife program spearheaded by the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, with the Watan Social and Technical Services Association, a local charity. Afghanistan has the highest maternal mortality rate in Asia, and the United Nations estimates an Afghan woman dies every 2 hours during pregnancy and childbirth. 40 young women from villages in Bamyan province are enrolled in the 2-year training program that started in April 2022 at a hospital in the provincial capital. They are learning basic but crucial skills which may one day help a woman giving birth at her village home. UNHCR hopes they will be able to expand the program, which also covers the neighboring Daikundi province. As PF October last year, around 24,000 Afghan women give birth each month in remote rural areas without access to healthcare, according to the United Nations Population Fund. When the roads are blocked, of course, there is no means of transportation. People even use donkeys to move patients to the clinic centers, but sometimes there is not even the opportunity for that, said Mohammed Ashraf Niazi, the head of UNHCR's Bamiyan office. Since taking over in 2021, Taliban authorities have barred women from universities and most charity jobs, but they have made exemptions in the healthcare sector, and UNHCR says local health authorities are supportive of the project. Many of the trainees, some with small children of their own, have faced logistical and financial challenges, often having to travel huge distances or live far from home to attend the program. But despite the difficulties, they are driven by the need of many women and families in remote areas who don't have the information and support they need for a safe delivery. Even with the new generation of technology, we are still witnessing mothers and children dying due to negligence of some mothers and their lack of knowledge. This situation motivated me to study the midwifery course in order to serve my people, said the 21-year-old trainee. China's top prosecutor says 78,000 people were charged with corruption over the 5-year period until 2022. Procurator General Zhang Jun announced the figure at the National People's Congress on Tuesday. The number is much lower than the figure during President Xi Jinping's first 5-year term until 2017, when more than 250,000 people were prosecuted. But corruption apparently remains widespread despite the Xi administration's anti-graft campaign. Zhang also reported that the number of criminal cases that disrupted market and economic order was up more than 30% from the previous 5-year period. He indicated that prosecutors will protect the interests of investors and severely punish offenders. Zhou stressed that those who violate the interests of the public will be punished. More than a dozen major Chinese cities have seen temperatures hit record seasonal highs this week, with central China's Wuhan and Zhengzhou at more than 10 degrees Celsius, 18°F, higher than normal for early March, official data showed. Wuhan, located on the middle reaches of the Yangtze River, registered temperatures of 26 Celsius on Monday, 12 degrees higher than the long-term early March average. While Beijing and surrounding cities also saw temperatures reach 22 to 25 Celsius earlier this week, China experienced months of extreme heat last year, with 267 weather stations measuring record-breaking temperatures in excess of 40 degrees during a 70-day summer drought that hit the entire Yangtze River basin, triggering fires and damaging crops. The country's Weather Bureau has already warned that it was facing another year of extreme weather in 2023 as a result of global climate change. The southwestern province of Yunnan, a major hydropower base, is already in the middle of a prolonged drought forecast to last into April, with average rainfall more than 60% lower than usual since November last year. The Poyang, China's biggest freshwater lake and a major flood outlet for the Yangtze, has also failed to recover from last year's drought, with water levels on Monday falling again below 7 meters, close to a record low, according to state media. Chinese weather officials said at a routine monthly press briefing last week that average temperatures for the whole of February were 1.6 degrees Celsius higher than normal, with average rainfall also 3.9% lower than the average. Changing weather patterns also meant that spring had come early in many regions south of the Yangtze River, in some cases as many as 20 days earlier than normal, said Gao Rong, vice director of the National Meteorological Center. Low-pressure conditions this week have also contributed to smog buildups throughout the pollution-prone region of Beijing-Tianjin-Hebei in northern China, where heavy industrial activities have also been ramped up. The Purchasing Managers' Index, PMI, for the global manufacturing sector rose for the second consecutive month to 49.9% in February, showing signs of stable recovery of the global economy, said the China Federation of Logistics and Purchasing, CFLP, on Monday. The global manufacturing PMI rose by 0.7 percentage points from January, approaching the reading above 50% that indicates expansion of the industry. Asia's manufacturing PMI rose above 51%, but the indexes for Americas and Europe remained below 50%. The African manufacturing PMI dropped significantly from the previous month, falling below 50%, said the Federation. In February, the global manufacturing PMI continued to rise to 49.9%, only 0.1 percentage points away from the 50% boom-bust line, reflecting that the current world economy is notably recovering. But we saw that the recovery momentum is still weak, and the development is uneven. The manufacturing industry in Asia performed the best, with China's performance as a highlight, said Su Hongkai, Deputy Director of Economic Policy Commission of China Association of Policy Science. Affected by geopolitical conflicts, the global industrial chain and supply chain are still not stable. Only by strengthening economic cooperation to maintain the stability of the global industrial chains can it be possible to promote the stable recovery of the global economy, analysts said. Over 86% of people polled in a Japanese government survey released Tuesday said they see a danger of the country being involved in a war, a figure that is slightly up from the previous poll in 2018. In the Cabinet Office survey, conducted between November 17 and December 25, 86.2% of the respondents said they see such danger or would say there is if they had to say, the highest figure since the 2009 survey. This is the highest percentage since the beginning of the 2009 surveys. In the previous survey in 2018, 85.5% of respondents said that there was a risk of the country being caught up in a war. A Defense Ministry official said the respondents seem to believe there is a worsening security environment due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, China's military moves in the East and South China Seas, and North Korea's repeated launches of ballistic missiles. In a multiple response question asking why they see such danger, 85.7% cited international tensions and conflicts, while 38.2% said the United Nations is not functioning sufficiently and 28.2% said Japan does not have sufficient defenses. The survey also showed that fewer people were satisfied with the self-defense force's current capability at 53.0%, down from 60.1% in the previous survey in 2018. When asked which defense-related issues are of concern in a multiple response question, North Korea's development of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles drew the highest number at 68.9%, followed by Japan's level of defense capabilities at 64.0%. 61.3% also think that China's military modernization and aggressive moves at sea are worrisome. 52.1% think Russia's attack on Ukraine is worrying. The survey was conducted with 3,000 people aged 18 and over nationwide. Spain's leftist government on March 7 introduced a draft law, designed to increase women's participation in politics and business. The draft, released on the eve of International Women's Day, is committed to promoting gender equality in one of the world's most unequal countries. The law on representation and equality will apply the principle of gender equality to elections, and set a minimum of 40% female representation on the boards of directors of large companies, and the executive boards of associations. Profession. Economy Minister Nadia Calvino said during a cabinet meeting, "We need to leverage 100% of the female talent in our country, to enhance the productivity of companies, to move towards strong and sustainable growth in line with time." Calvino, who made headlines last year, said she would not attend events if women were not represented equally among speakers. She said the draft law would increase gender equality in the public and private sectors, strengthening Spain as a leader in gender equality. The draft law requires women to make up at least 40% of the management board of any listed company. Deadline is July 2024. Unlisted companies, but with more than 250 workers and an annual turnover of €50 million, must meet the target by 2026. These are tougher targets than the ones set out in an EU directive, under which women must make up 40% of all non-executive directors by 2026, or 33% of all senior leadership. Hi. Spanish Business Association COE declined to comment, before knowing details of the proposal. According to a report by the business school IESE and the media company Atrevia, the percentage of women represented on the boards of Spanish public companies has increased to 32.37% in 2022 from less than 30% in the year before. According to a report by the business school IESE and the media company Atrevia, the percentage of women represented on the boards of Spanish public companies has increased to 32.37% in 2022 from less than 30% in the year before. The Vatican museums agreed to return to Greece three 2,500-year-old pieces of the Parthenon on Tuesday, March 7. Greek representatives said the gesture should be imitated by others, a likely reference to a collection of sculptures from the ancient temple that is held by Britain. The fragments held by the Vatican have been in the papal collections for more than a century, and Pope Francis ordered their return last December. The Pope donated them to Hieronymus II, the head of the Greek Orthodox Church, as a gesture of ecumenical dialogue with the Roman Catholic Church. Hieronymus' representative at Tuesday's signing ceremony at the Vatican, Reverend Papamikroulis Emmanuel, called the Pope's gesture historic. The Parthenon, which sits atop the Acropolis in Athens, was completed in the 5th century BC as a temple to the goddess Athena, and its decorative friezes contain some of the greatest examples of ancient Greek sculpture. Over the years, Greece and Britain have been constantly embroiled in tensions over a collection of Parthenon sculptures known as the Elgin marbles. The others are from the head of a boy and the head of a bearded male. Athens has repeatedly called on the British Museum to return these items, which were taken from the temple by British diplomat Lord Elgin in the early 19th century. Meanwhile, the British Museum has always ruled out the possibility of returning the collection. They claim they bought them legally.